Welcome to Freedom and Reason podcast. I'm Andrew Austin with the University of Wisconsin Green Bay. Recently, I participated in a conversation with eighth graders. They were working on media projects and they spoke with various experts, and they're doing their own research, and they're going to put together 5-minute news stories. So I'll only appear briefly in their projects. However, I gave lengthy answers to their questions, and their questions were quite good, and I felt they would be of general use to my audience. I won't reveal the names of the eighth graders. I have a problem with circulating that kind of information on the internet. So I'll have their questions on slides, and then you'll hear my answers as I gave them live during the conversation. So let's go. Well, there's certainly, I think we have to make one distinction that I'm a criminologist, and so I distinguish between actual violence and simulated violence. So I tend to talk about video games as simulated violence, and just like movies and photography and things like that. And compared to where it was when it started, I remember when video games first came out. The first video game I played was Pong. It was just a little light that went back and forth across the screen. So, in contrast to that, absolutely. But I think it's important to make sure that people understand that violence, we define violence as behavior that causes physical harm and damage. And so, if it's about ideas or about visual representations, it doesn't really count as violence technically. The research doesn't support the claim that we hear a lot that video games are associated with more violence. And I think one of the most important things of understanding about that is that violence has actually decreased dramatically over the last several years. This is a much safer society than it was, say, when I was a kid. The one exception, perhaps, is mass shootings, which you've probably heard about in the news. Um, it's unclear whether mass shootings are rising recently or not, but we didn't have this when I was a kid. So, to what extent is that connected to video games? Um, I will point out that the widespread availability of simulated violence in video games occurs after mass shootings start. One other thing I want to say is that while we're playing video games and we're playing them for long periods of time, which a lot of people do, they're not going to be in a position to commit violent actions, right? So we would have to imagine that if there's a link between the two, that it would happen later in time, and we just don't see that link there. I can tell you, it, given how many video games there are and how much more simulated violence there is, if there was a link, we would expect to see a lot more violence, and we actually see less violence. So I'm not one who believes that there is a link between video games and violence. So that's the negative effect. I think the positive effects are hand-eye coordination, um, being able to live in worlds that you can use your imagination very vividly. I think some of these games where you're playing with other players around the world allows you to meet people from different cultures and different countries. That's very exciting. And they're a lot of fun. I play video games, so uh, that's a positive thing if you're having fun, I think. I've not restricted video games for my children. I have two sons, but they have friends over, and I do respect parents' decisions about whether or not there should be restrictions. So I ask, uh, I ask parents, this is the kind of video games that my sons play. These are the kinds of movies they watch and so forth. And if it's a sleepover or something, would it be a problem if they watch the movies? And if you don't want them to, then we'll do something else. So I clear it with parents. I respect parents' decision in that. Um, but personally, because I don't see that link that we hear a lot about playing video games and some of the problems. I'm not convinced of that. I don't restrict, but people have different opinions, and you have to respect different opinions. And ultimately, parents are in charge, and they're certainly responsible for their children. So I try to be responsible for them as well. The question about whether age limits should be set by government or by industry, that's a little bit more difficult. What role the government has, because free speech does include video games. And if the government is supposed to allow for free speech in America, which is one of the values that we hold, it makes it a little bit problematic, right, for the government then to create age restrictions. But that's quite a long conversation to have. I just feel it's probably best to leave that to parents. Well, I have a lot of, as a criminologist, somebody who studies crime, I certainly have a lot of opinions. But um, there's good news in crime, and that violent crime has been declining, as I said earlier, for a long time. And not just in the United States, but throughout the Western world. So in Europe as well, and in Japan. And so that's good news. I think there's lots of reasons for it. One is, I think we have we built better societies over time. We've become more caring, and we have better precautions for potential dangers. Um, there is this problem of mass shootings. I don't think they're caused by video games. To be honest, I think there the evidence suggests that it's the availability of guns that are really associated with that, and because you don't see that in other countries, you see that in America, and we're pretty unique when it comes to how many guns we have. Um, One last thing I'll say about with video games, I think it's possible. Some research shows that video games, while they are associated with more aggression, drain off that aggression. In other words, you have all these frustrations and you play video games and you can get out some of your frustrations in the video games. And then the idea is that then you'll be less inclined, right, to commit real violence and get in fights and those kinds of things. So there may be an actual positive role in video games by providing a simulated experience to sort of lessening the possibility of an actual experience when it comes, because yeah, we do get frustrated from time to time, and when we play video games, and it does allow us, like any sports, right, tennis, football, those things allow us to get out our aggressions, and so there may be some positive aspects to that. But again, the good news is that crime and violence are down in our society, and that's for a much longer discussion, obviously, for all the reasons why that's probably true. But I think the main reason is that we're a better society than we were when I was a kid. I was born in the 1960s, and there was racism, and it was a very bad problem, and all of these things. And while there's still some of these problems around, we've tackled them and done a lot. And in fact, your parents' generation and your grandparents' generation did a lot of hard work try to build a safer society, and I think we've done quite a good job with that, and I think you will as well. I think it's been pretty dramatic. I think internet generally has really impacted the way that we behave. When I was growing up, you went outside and you met people and talked to people and so forth, and that's still the case for your generation. But much more of your activity is online. It's virtual. It's not face to face, and that does have an effect, as we're social creatures, and so how we interact socially. Depending on how we wind up doing that, technically does have an effect. Um, your sociologists like to organize ages into categories, and you're members of what we call Generation Z, and your experiences are very different as a generation than previous experiences. You go outside less. Your parents are sort of closer to you. They don't give your generation as much latitude as they gave our generation to sort of we just leave in the morning and ride our bicycles all day and come back at night. And um, and so that means that when you take social media and the way in which social media changes your perception, it tends to be very superficial. You know what I mean by that? In other words, when you have a conversation, you know a person really well, you can have deep conversations about all kinds of things. But when you're looking at social media, it tends to be the friendships are many, but they're not as close as they would be in the rest of your parts of your life. And when things become more superficial in that sense, people start focusing on things like appearances. And so when people put pictures of themselves out there and they say, "What do you think about this?" or "How do I look?" and then because the internet also allows people to be, I don't know any other way of saying this, but you're nicer to people you're in a room with. You can be less civil and a little bit harsher with people when it's virtual, right? And so what happens is feelings get hurt. And so there's a lot of positive things about social media. I don't want to make it sound like it's all bad, but that is different. It is a different way of responding um, to one another. And then when the normal things happen between people, when you have arguments and so forth, and people tease other people and so forth, it's harder to know exactly what's going on there. And so we're starting to see some fallout with that. Yeah. Well, I think that lack of face-to-face interaction is a big risk. Um, it One of the benefits of that is it allows you to talk to people around the world, right? So you can meet people that you wouldn't meet in your community, and that means different cultures, right? And with people of different worldviews, and that's exciting. But when you have people who are living a lot of their lives now online, and those are the only interactions they're having, or most of the interactions they're having, um, that can that can be a real drawback. Again, as I said, we're social animals, and we uh, depend on um, having that face-to-face contact. Um, Again, one of the other benefits about social media is the ability to be able to be creative, right? To make videos and share them with people, and take ideas that you find and mix them up, and so all of that's a lot of fun. And so I think balance is important. This is probably a bit up to parents to decide for their children what they should do. But there are some real effects to sitting online or sitting in a chair with a device and just engaging in social media all day, because you need exercise, right? There's a tendency to snack, and um, you need good nutrition. So there's a lot of things that we need to do: go out and play and eat right and have those kind of stimulating experiences. And so parents have to be careful not to let this is my opinion. They have to be careful not to let their children spend too much time in social media so that it blocks out other things. Children need to sleep just like adults, and so and of course you have your schoolwork. I don't know how much homework you get assigned, but if social media can get in the way of homework projects and other things, and so parents have to closely monitor that. Or social media users themselves have to monitor that. I have to admit, I have to be disciplined myself because you get on Facebook or something and you're getting in arguments with people, and it's a lot of fun, and you're thinking, wait a second, I have work I have to do. So it's sometimes hard to pull yourself away. So self-limiting, I think, is an important thing to think about when you're engaged in social media use. If the government does it, yes, I think so. The Supreme Court decided many, many years ago, back in the 1960s, that young people have a First Amendment right just like adults do, and that may what we're really talking about here is content, right? What's being said. the government shouldn't interfere with that. Um, the courts have given less protection to free speech when it comes to what we call the private sphere, so businesses. So if Facebook or something wants to, wants to regulate your speech, while I have some problems with that, the the court doesn't seem to have problems with that, right? So those social media sites can limit and restrict, and so there are restrictions, age restrictions on that. Um, when where parents are concerned, no, if parents restrict what children can see and hear, and I should emphasize that free speech isn't just about what you say and what you write, it's about what you hear and what you read. And parents can censor, if you will, that. They do have that authority. And I respect that authority, and so I'm not going to criticize parents too much for that. But when the government gets involved, we do have a First Amendment, we do have freedom of speech. We don't want the government regulating or restricting speech except in obviously with terroristic threats and things. There are reasons why the government can do that, but generally we want to have an open society, and that means we have to have open lines of communication. I think on balance, that social media is a good thing. It's enlarged our universe of people we can contact. We're able to communicate more broadly our ideas. It allows us to when I was growing up, we had three private television stations and one public television station, and we had people talking at us all day. And with social media now, we can talk back and we can have conversations, and so in that sense, it's much better. I think it does carry some potential harms, uh, uh, and um, and that's why balance is important. And so I do believe in socially responsible media use, and I think that's largely on people who are providing content, right? People who are sharing content need to think about the things they're putting out there. And I think if we self-regulate in that way, then don't have to worry about the government getting too involved in what we're talking about, what we're thinking about. So yeah, on balance, absolutely. I have, like I said, I use social media quite a lot, and it's a great way for me to communicate my ideas. I'm not just teaching criminology in the classroom. I can have a blog, and I can share, the ideas that I talk about in the classroom. I can share that with people who aren't in my class, and that's a great thing to be able to do, and then have them provide feedback to the things I'm saying. That's great. Thank you so much. Bye bye. That was fantastic. So this is going to be assembled into a. Oh, I'd love to see it. This is a very creative thing you're doing, and getting students to be independent thinkers and creative agents. Yep. Tell them they did a great job. Yeah. I know. I can imagine. Yeah. I was a little nervous myself. So thank you for this opportunity. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.